"Wait, don't go that way," she called out, her voice barely cutting through the rain. "That road doesn't lead anywhere." The storm had swallowed the city in a cold, relentless downpour, the kind that blurred streetlights into hazy halos and turned every sidewalk into a slick mirror of gray. Lily Harper stood beneath the flickering awning of a closed convenience store, her thin hoodie soaked through, strands of chestnut hair clinging to her cheeks. In her hands, a damp piece of paper trembled, not from the cold alone, but from the urgency in her chest. Across the street, a black SUV idled awkwardly at the wrong turn, its headlights slicing through sheets of rain like two searching eyes. The man inside looked out of place, gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor him to something real, something certain. Lily hesitated for half a second, her fingers tightening around the last dry napkin she'd salvaged from her shift earlier that night. It wasn't much, just a scrap of paper and a pen that barely worked, but it was all she had. Still, she stepped off the curb, rain immediately soaking her sneakers as she crossed toward him, raising her hand slightly to get his attention. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in his early 30s, sharp features softened by confusion, his dark coat expensive enough to look absurd in a neighborhood like this. "You're lost," Lily said simply, her breath visible in the cold air. He blinked, surprised more by her certainty than her words. I think I took a wrong turn," he admitted, his voice calm but edged with something deeper. Unease, maybe even fear. Lily nodded, already kneeling slightly against the hood of the car, using it as a makeshift desk as she smoothed out the napkin. "This part of town loops back on itself," she said quickly, sketching rough lines with careful strokes, ignoring how the ink bled slightly from the rain. "If you keep going straight, you'll just end up circling. You need to cut through Maple and take the old service road. It's not on GPS, but it'll get you back to the main highway." Her handwriting was quick, imperfect, but purposeful. The man watched her in silence, something shifting behind his eyes as she worked, as if this small, ordinary act carried more weight than it should. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. Lily didn't look up. "Because you asked," she replied, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. When she finished, she held out the napkin, now a fragile map of ink and intention. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain filled the silence, tapping against metal and pavement like a steady heartbeat. Then he reached out, taking it carefully, as if it might fall apart in his hands. "Thank you," he said, and this time, there was something real in his voice. Lily gave a small shrug, already stepping back, already fading into the background she belonged to. "Just don't get lost again," she said with a faint, tired smile. The SUV pulled away slowly, taillights disappearing into the rain, leaving Lily alone once more under the flickering light. She watched until the car was gone, then looked down at her empty hands. The last piece of paper she had now gone with a stranger. Behind her, the city remained indifferent, cold, and loud. But somewhere, miles away, a man would unfold that fragile map and realize it was the first honest thing anyone had given him in a very long time. By the time Lily stepped back inside the narrow hallway of her apartment building, the rain had already soaked through every layer she wore, leaving her skin cold and her bones heavy with exhaustion. The flickering fluorescent light above buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive, casting uneven shadows along peeling walls that smelled faintly of old paint and damp wood. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the chipped railing, counting each step out of habit more than necessity. 3 flights up, 12 steps each, always the same. Her shoes left faint wet prints behind her, small reminders that she had once again come home with nothing but tired feet and an empty pocket. Inside her tiny studio, the air felt just as cold as outside. The heater had stopped working 2 weeks ago, and the landlord had stopped answering her messages even earlier than that. Lily dropped her keys into a cracked ceramic bowl by the door and stood still for a moment, listening to the silence. No television, no music, just the distant hum of traffic somewhere beyond the walls. She peeled off her hoodie and hung it over the back of a chair, then rubbed her hands together, trying to bring some warmth back into her fingers. On the small table by the window sat a stack of unpaid bills, the edges curling slightly, as if even paper could feel the weight pressing down on her life. Rent overdue. Electricity warning. Final notice stamped in red ink that felt louder than any voice. She picked one up, stared at it for a second, then set it back down without opening it. There was nothing new inside she had not already imagined a dozen times. Instead, she moved toward the kitchenette, opening the cabinet to reveal exactly what she expected. 1 can of soup, half a box of crackers, and a single packet of instant coffee she had been saving for a day that felt worth it. Tonight did not qualify. She closed the cabinet gently, as if making noise might somehow make things worse, then sat down on the edge of her bed, pulling her knees up slightly. For a moment, her mind drifted back to the man in the car. The way he had looked at her, not like she was invisible, not like she was in the way, but like what she said actually mattered. It was a strange thought, unfamiliar enough to feel almost uncomfortable. She shook her head lightly, brushing it off. People passed through lives like hers all the time, brief intersections that meant nothing once they were gone. He would forget. They always did. Across the city, miles away from flickering lights and unpaid bills, Ethan Cole sat in the driver's seat of his car, now parked safely beneath the glow of a private garage. The engine had been off for several minutes, yet he had not moved. In his hand, the napkin rested carefully unfolded, its ink slightly smudged but still clear enough to follow. A simple map, drawn in hurried lines, imperfect and uneven, but undeniably real. He traced one of the paths with his finger, replaying her voice in his mind, the certainty in it, the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing but still chose to give. Slowly, he leaned back against the seat, exhaling as something unfamiliar settled in his chest. Not relief, not exactly. Something quieter, heavier. He glanced around the polished concrete walls, the expensive cars lined up in perfect order, the silent proof of a life built on control and precision. And yet, none of it felt as grounding as that fragile piece of paper now resting in his hand. For the first time in a long while, Ethan did not reach for his phone, did not check messages or schedules or the endless stream of expectations waiting for him. Instead, he folded the napkin carefully, almost deliberately, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, close enough to feel. As if losing it would mean losing something he did not fully understand yet, but knew he was not ready to let go of. The next morning arrived without warmth, only a pale gray light slipping through the thin curtain of Lily's window, barely strong enough to push away the shadows in her small room. The city outside was already moving, engines humming, footsteps echoing faintly on wet pavement, but inside, everything felt slow, heavy, as if time itself had decided not to rush for her. Lily sat at the edge of her bed, pulling on the same worn sneakers, the fabric still damp from the night before. She pressed her heel down firmly, ignoring the cold, then stood up with a quiet breath, steadying herself before the day could begin. There was no breakfast waiting, no moment of ease. Just routine. She grabbed her canvas tote bag, slung it over her shoulder, and glanced once at the stack of bills on the table before turning away. Looking longer would not change anything. Outside, the air carried the sharp chill of early morning, somewhere around 40 degrees, enough to sting the skin but not enough to slow the city down. Lily walked quickly, hands tucked into her sleeves, her pace guided by habit and necessity. 2 blocks to the bus stop, then a 15-minute ride downtown, then another 5-minute walk to the diner where she worked the early shift. It was not a life she had chosen, but it was one she kept showing up for, day after day, because stopping was not an option. The diner smelled like coffee and grease the moment she stepped inside, the familiar warmth wrapping around her like something close to comfort. The bell above the door chimed softly, but no one looked up. No one ever did. "You are late." A voice called from behind the counter, sharp but not loud enough to draw attention. Mr. Dawson did not need to raise his voice to be heard. Lily glanced at the clock. 3 minutes past 7. "Bus was slow," she said quietly, already tying the apron around her waist. He gave a short nod, not quite accepting, not quite arguing, then turned back to the register. That was how things worked here. No warmth, no hostility, just survival. Lily moved quickly, pouring coffee, wiping tables, taking orders with a practiced rhythm that required no thought. Eggs, bacon, toast. Black coffee, no sugar. Refill before they asked. Smile just enough to keep things smooth, but not enough to invite conversation. Hours passed without notice. blending together in the steady hum of plates and voices until the door opened again just after 10:30. This time, something shifted, subtle but undeniable. The bell rang the same way. The air felt the same, but Lily paused for half a second, her hand hovering over a stack of menus as she looked up. A man stepped inside, his presence quiet but distinct, like a note slightly out of place in a familiar song. He wore a dark coat, simple but well-made, the kind that did not belong in a place like this. His eyes scanned the room briefly, not with judgment, but with intention, as if searching for something specific. Or someone. Lily looked away quickly, brushing off the feeling, and grabbed a menu. "Seat yourself anywhere," she said automatically, her voice steady, professional. The man nodded, choosing a booth by the window, the same kind of seat every regular avoided because of the draft. He sat down without hesitation, placing his hands lightly on the table, his gaze drifting for just a moment before settling. Lily approached with the menu, her steps even, her expression neutral. "What can I get you?" she asked, not looking at him directly at first. "Coffee," he said, his voice calm, familiar in a way that made something in her chest tighten just slightly. "Black." She nodded, turning to leave, but then he added softly, "And do you still draw maps on napkins?" Her steps stopped, just for a second, long enough for the question to land, long enough for recognition to flicker beneath the surface. Slowly, she turned back, her eyes meeting his for the first time since he walked in. And suddenly, the rain, the cold, the quiet moment under a broken awning came, rushing back all at once. For a moment, the noise of the diner seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the quiet echo of rain against pavement and the memory of a dim streetlight flickering overhead. Lily's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her notepad, her breath catching just enough to betray the shift inside her. She studied his face more closely now, no longer just another customer passing through, but the man from that night, the one who had taken the last dry thing she owned without hesitation and looked at her like it mattered. "You," she said softly, the word almost lost between surprise and certainty. Ethan gave a small nod, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just enough to confirm what she already knew. "Yeah," he replied, his voice steady, but there was something else beneath it now, something warmer, more grounded. "It is me." Lily blinked once, then twice, as if resetting herself back into the present, back into the rhythm she understood. Orders, tables, movement. That was safe. This was not. "I did not think," she started, then stopped, shaking her head slightly as she forced a small, professional smile. "Coffee. Right. Black." She turned quickly, moving toward the counter before the moment could stretch any further, before whatever this was could become something she did not have time to figure out. Behind her, Ethan watched her go, his expression calm but attentive, as if he understood exactly what she was doing and why. Lily poured the coffee with careful precision, her hands steady even as her thoughts moved faster than she liked. He came back. That was the part that did not make sense. People did not come back. Not for something small, not for something simple. She placed the cup on a tray and returned to his table, setting it down gently in front of him. "Here you go," she said, her tone neutral again, controlled. Ethan wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the warmth settle into his fingers before he spoke. "I used your map," he said, glancing up at her. "It worked exactly the way you said it would." Lily gave a small shrug, her eyes dropping briefly to the table. "It is not that complicated," she replied. "You just have to know where you are going." The words came out naturally, but something about them lingered, hanging in the space between them longer than expected. Ethan smiled slightly at that, not because it was impressive, but because it was honest. "That is the problem," he said quietly. "Most people do not." Lily frowned faintly, not fully understanding what he meant, and not sure she wanted to. Conversations like this had a way of drifting into places she could not afford to stay. "Do you want anything else?" she asked, already preparing to step away again. "No," he said, then paused, as if reconsidering. "Actually, yes. Sit down for a minute." The request was simple, but it landed heavier than it should have. Lily glanced around instinctively, checking the room, the other tables, the counter where Mr. Dawson stood with his usual watchful stillness. "I am working," she said, her voice low, cautious. "I cannot just sit." Ethan nodded, understanding, but not letting it go. Then just stand, he said gently. But do not disappear this time. That made her look at him again. Really look this time. And what she saw was not expectation or entitlement, but something quieter, something almost unfamiliar in a place like this. He was not asking like someone used to being obeyed. He was asking like someone who did not want to lose something again. Lily hesitated, the seconds stretching just enough to matter, then shifted her weight slightly, staying where she was instead of walking away. You found your way back without the map, she said, a hint of challenge in her voice now, something protective. Ethan reached into his coat slowly, carefully, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the table between them, smoothing it open with deliberate care. The ink was still there, faintly blurred but unmistakable. Her map. No, he said quietly, meeting her eyes. I did not. The napkin lay between them like something far more valuable than it had any right to be, its edges slightly wrinkled, the ink softened by rain but still holding its shape, still carrying the quiet intention of the moment it was created. Lily stared at it, her chest tightening in a way she could not immediately explain, as if seeing it again brought back more than just a memory. It brought back the feeling of that night, the cold, the uncertainty, and the strange, fleeting sense that she had done something that mattered. You kept it, she said, her voice quieter now, stripped of the distance she had been trying to maintain. Ethan nodded once, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table, close to the paper but not touching it. I almost lost it this morning, he admitted, a faint hint of something like humor in his tone. That would have been unfortunate. Lily let out a small breath that almost resembled a laugh, though it did not quite reach that point. It is just a napkin, she said, but even as she spoke, she knew that was not entirely true. Not anymore. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he replied, his gaze steady, grounded. It is not. There was a pause then, not awkward, but full, like something unspoken was settling into place between them. Around them, the diner continued its steady rhythm, plates clinking, voices overlapping, the world moving forward without noticing that something small but significant was unfolding at a corner table. Lily shifted her weight slightly, her eyes flicking toward the counter again, then back to him. Why did you come back? She asked, the question simple but direct, cutting through everything else. Ethan did not answer right away. He leaned back slightly in his seat, considering, not searching for words but choosing them carefully. Because I could not stop thinking about that moment, he said finally. Not the rain, not the road. You. Lily's expression tightened just a fraction, her defenses rising instinctively, the way they always did when something got too close, too personal. You do not know me, she said, her tone firmer now, more grounded in the reality she trusted. That was just a random night. Ethan accepted that without resistance, nodding slightly. You are right, he said. I do not know you. He paused, then added quietly, but I know what it felt like. That made her hesitate again, the certainty in his voice cutting through her usual assumptions. What? She asked before she could stop herself. Ethan glanced down briefly at the napkin, then back at her. It felt real, he said, and I do not get a lot of that. The words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind that did not come from exaggeration, but from absence. Lily studied him more carefully now, noticing the details she had overlooked before. The coat, yes, but also the watch, subtle but expensive, the way he sat, the quiet confidence that did not need to prove itself. He did not belong here. That much was clear. You are not from around here, she said slowly, not as a question, but as an observation. Ethan smiled slightly, not denying it. No, he said. Not really. She crossed her arms lightly, a small barrier, a way to regain balance. Then you should not get used to this place, she replied. It is not exactly your world. Ethan leaned forward just a little, his voice softer now, but more certain. Maybe not, he said. But you are. That landed differently. Lily felt it. Even if she did not want to show it. Even if she immediately looked away, focusing on the edge of the table, the worn surface she knew so well. I have to get back to work, she said, her voice quieter now, less defensive but still controlled. Ethan nodded, not pushing, not trying to hold her there. Okay, he said, but I will be here for a while. She glanced at him one more time, just briefly, then turned and walked away, her steps steady, practiced. But this time, something had shifted. Because for the first time in a long time, Lily Harper did not feel completely invisible. And at the table by the window, Ethan Cole sat with a cup of coffee growing cold and a fragile map that had somehow become the most important thing he carried. The bell above the diner door kept ringing throughout the late morning, a steady rhythm of people coming and going. But for Lily, everything felt slightly out of sync, like the world had shifted just a few inches off-center. She moved through her routine the same way she always did, refilling cups, clearing plates, offering polite smiles that never quite reached her eyes. Yet her awareness kept drifting back to the corner booth by the window. Ethan had not left. He sat there quietly, not demanding attention, not trying to pull her away from her work, simply existing in the space with an unusual kind of patience that felt almost deliberate. Every now and then, she caught a glimpse of him from across the room, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup or resting near that folded napkin he had placed carefully beside it, as if it belonged there. Around 11:15, the diner slowed just enough for the noise to soften, the rush easing into a brief lull that workers like Lily learned to recognize without checking the clock. She wiped down a nearby table, her movements automatic, then glanced toward the counter where Mr. Dawson stood counting receipts with his usual rigid focus. He was not looking at her. That mattered. Lily took a breath, subtle but intentional, then turned and walked back toward the booth by the window. "You are still here," she said, not quite accusing, not quite curious, but somewhere in between. Ethan looked up, a faint smile forming like he had been expecting that question. "I said I would be," he replied simply. Lily slid into the seat across from him before she could overthink it, her apron still tied, her posture slightly tense, as if she might stand up again at any second. "People do not usually stay this long for one cup of coffee," she said, folding her hands together on the table to keep them still. "Then maybe I am not here for the coffee," Ethan answered, his tone light but grounded, not playful in a way that felt insincere. Lily exhaled softly through her nose, a small sign of resistance that did not fully hold. "So what are you here for?" she asked, meeting his eyes directly this time. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, closing some of the distance without making it feel forced. "To understand something," he said. "What?" she pressed. He glanced briefly at the napkin, then back at her. How someone with almost nothing still chooses to give something away without hesitation. Lily's expression shifted, not defensive this time, but thoughtful, as if the question reached somewhere deeper than she expected. "It was just directions," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "No," he replied. "It was not." There was a pause, longer than the ones before, but not uncomfortable. "Just real." Lily looked down at her hands for a moment, noticing the faint lines of soap and wear across her skin, the kind that never quite washed away. "You make it sound like it was important," she said, her voice softer now. Ethan did not hesitate. "It was," he said, "more than you think." Lily let that sit for a second, then leaned back slightly, studying him again with a different kind of curiosity now, less guarded, more searching. "You talk like someone who is not used to simple things," she said. Ethan smiled faintly, not offended, not surprised. "That is because I am not," he admitted. "And that is exactly the problem." She tilted her head slightly, considering him in a way she had not allowed herself to before. "So what? You came back here to learn how to be normal?" she asked, a hint of dry humor slipping into her voice. Ethan let out a quiet breath, something close to a laugh, but softer. "No," he said. "I came back because for once, I did not feel like I had to be anything at all." That landed in a way Lily did not expect, not heavy, not overwhelming, but steady, like something true finding its place. She glanced toward the counter again, then back at him, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "That sounds nice," she admitted. Ethan nodded slowly. "It is," he said. "And I was hoping maybe I could stay in that feeling a little longer." Lily did not respond right away, but she did not stand up either. And for the first time since she sat down, she did not feel like she needed to rush back to the noise, because somehow, in the middle of a small diner that had never changed, something had quietly begun to. The minutes stretched into something softer, less defined, as the diner settled into its late morning lull, the kind where time did not rush, but simply existed in quiet repetition. Lily remained seated across from Ethan longer than she intended, her body still angled slightly, as if ready to stand, yet something kept her anchored in place. Maybe it was the way he spoke without urgency, or the way he listened without interrupting, or maybe it was simply the unfamiliar feeling of being seen without being judged. She was not sure, and that uncertainty made her cautious. "So what do you actually do?" she asked after a moment, her tone casual, but her eyes attentive, searching for something more concrete, something she could understand and place into a category that made sense. Ethan leaned back slightly, considering the question, his gaze drifting briefly toward the window where the light had shifted just enough to reflect faint outlines of the street outside. "I work in business," he said finally, the answer. Simple, almost deliberately vague. Lily raised an eyebrow, not impressed. "That could mean anything," she replied. "It usually does," he said with a small smile. She studied him for a second longer, then nodded slowly, accepting the answer without fully believing it. People hid things all the time. She had learned not to push too hard. "And you got lost?" she asked, a hint of disbelief slipping into her voice now. "Someone who works in business does not usually end up in my neighborhood by accident." Ethan let out a quiet breath, not defensive, just honest. "No," he admitted. "Not by accident." That caught her attention. "Then why were you there?" she pressed, leaning forward just slightly, curiosity overtaking caution. Ethan hesitated, not because he did not have an answer, but because the truth was more complicated than a simple explanation. "I needed to get away from something," he said, "and I drove until I did not know where I was anymore." Lily's expression softened just a fraction at that, the answer landing in a place she understood more than she expected. Getting lost on purpose was not as different from her life as it sounded. "And did it work?" she asked quietly. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes steady. "For a few minutes," he said, "until I realized I had no idea how to get back." Lily let out a small breath, almost a laugh this time, but gentler. "That sounds about right," she said. "Getting lost is easy. Finding your way back is the hard part." Ethan nodded slowly, as if that was exactly the point. "That is why your map mattered," he said. "It gave me a way back." She looked down at the table again, her fingers tracing a faint scratch in the surface, absorbing the words without responding right away. There was something strange about hearing her small action described like that, like it had weight beyond what she intended. "It was just directions," she repeated, softer this time, but less certain. "Maybe," Ethan said, "but it was also trust." That made her look up again. "Trust?" she echoed. He nodded. "You did not know me," he said. "You did not know if I deserved your help, or if I would even listen. But you helped anyway." Lily held his gaze for a moment, then looked away again, uncomfortable with the attention, with the meaning. He kept placing on something she had done without thinking. "If you start overthinking every small thing people do, nothing will make sense anymore," she said quietly. Ethan smiled faintly at that. "Or maybe everything starts to make more sense," he replied. Before she could respond, the sharp voice from the counter cut through the moment. "Lily." She turned quickly, instinct snapping back into place. Mr. Dawson stood with his arms crossed, not angry, but not patient either. "Break is over." Lily nodded immediately, pushing herself up from the booth, the brief pause in her routine ending as quickly as it began. She glanced back at Ethan for just a second, something unspoken passing between them, then stepped away, returning to the rhythm she knew. But as she moved through the diner again, something had shifted beneath the surface, something she could not quite name. And at the table by the window, Ethan remained where he was, watching quietly, not with urgency, not with expectation, but with the steady certainty of someone who had finally found something worth staying for. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of motion, but for Lily, every small detail seemed sharper than usual, as if something inside her had been quietly turned up. The clink of silverware, the hum of conversation, the steady drip of coffee being poured, all of it layered over a single awareness she could not ignore. Ethan was still there, not hovering, not intruding, just present, like a fixed point in a place where everything else constantly shifted. Around 1:30, the lunch crowd thinned, leaving behind scattered plates and half-empty cups, the kind of quiet that came after a rush. Lily wiped down the last table in her section, her movements slower now, more deliberate, her mind no longer fully occupied by routine. She glanced toward the window again, almost without thinking, and noticed something new. Ethan was not just sitting anymore. He was watching the room, observing, taking in details with a focus that did not match someone casually passing time. The way he noticed the cook handing off orders, the way he tracked the rhythm of customers coming and going, the way his eyes followed Lily without making it obvious. It was subtle, but it was there, and it did not feel ordinary. Lily frowned slightly, setting her cloth down on the counter as a quiet thought began to form. People like him did not just sit in diners for hours. Not unless there was a reason. She poured herself a glass of water, buying a moment, then walked back toward his table again, this time with less hesitation but more intent. "You are studying this place," she said, not sitting, but standing across from him with her arms loosely folded. It was not an accusation, but it was not casual either. Ethan looked up, a small flicker of surprise crossing his face before it settled into something calm again. "Observing," he corrected gently. "There is a difference." Lily tilted her head slightly. "Not really," she replied. "Both mean you are paying attention to something most people ignore." Ethan considered that, then nodded once. "Fair point," he said. She held his gaze for a second longer, then shifted slightly, her tone changing just enough to carry a hint of something sharper. "So what are you actually looking for?" she asked. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his cup, taking a small sip of now lukewarm coffee, as if giving himself a moment to choose how much to reveal. "Patterns," he said finally. Lily raised an eyebrow. "Patterns?" she repeated. "In a diner?" He nodded. "In people," he clarified. "In how they move, what they choose, what they ignore." Lily let out a quiet breath, something between skepticism and curiosity. "That sounds like something a researcher would say," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "Or someone who makes decisions based on people," he replied. That made her pause again, the pieces not fully fitting, but no longer completely scattered either. She looked at him more closely now, noticing the details she had pushed aside before. The watch, not flashy but precise. The posture, relaxed but controlled. The way he spoke, measured, intentional. "You are not just some guy who works in business," she said slowly, more statement than question this time. Ethan did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. He simply held her gaze, letting the silence carry what words did not. Lily felt something shift again, a quiet realization forming just beneath the surface. She did not know exactly who he was, but she knew one thing clearly now. He did not belong in this place. And yet, he was choosing to stay. "People like you do not sit around studying diners for no reason," she said, her voice softer but more certain. "So either you are hiding something, or you are looking for something you lost." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression steady, his voice calm, but more direct than before. "What if it is both?" he asked. That landed deeper than she expected, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt true in a way she could not immediately explain. Lily looked away for a moment, her eyes drifting toward the window, the light outside shifting as the afternoon moved forward. Then she looked back at him, her expression no longer just cautious, but engaged, like she was stepping into something instead of away from it. "Then you picked a strange place to start," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "No," he replied. "I think I picked the exact right one." And for the first time since he walked into the diner, Lily did not immediately dismiss the idea. By late afternoon, the light outside had softened into a pale golden hue that stretched across the diner windows, casting long reflections over the worn tables and tiled floor. The rush was over, leaving behind a quiet that felt almost fragile, as if any sudden movement might break it. Lily stood near the counter, refilling sugar dispensers one by one, her hands moving on instinct while her thoughts circled back to the same place again and again. The man by the window. Ethan. He had not left. Hours had passed, and still, he remained, no longer just a customer, but something else she could not easily define. A question, maybe, or a disruption. Mr. Dawson finally noticed. He leaned slightly toward her, his voice low but direct. "That guy," he said, nodding subtly toward the booth. "He has been here all day? He bothering you?" Lily shook her head quickly, almost too quickly. "No," she said. "He is just sitting." Mr. Dawson narrowed his eyes slightly, not convinced but not pushing further. People who sit that long are either waiting for something or avoiding something, he muttered before turning back to the register. The words lingered longer than they should have. Lily glanced toward Ethan again, her curiosity now sharpened by something else, something closer to concern. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over once more, this time without pretending it was just part of her job. You know, she said as she stopped beside the table, most people would have left by now. Ethan looked up at her, his expression calm, almost thoughtful. Most people are not me, he replied. Lily exhaled softly, then slid into the seat across from him again, less hesitant this time, though still aware of the invisible line she was stepping over. My boss thinks you are either waiting for something or avoiding something, she said, watching his reaction closely. Ethan smiled faintly, not surprised. He is probably right, he said. Which one? She asked. Ethan leaned back slightly, his eyes drifting toward the window before returning to her. Both, he said. Lily held his gaze, searching for something deeper in the answer. What are you avoiding? She asked quietly. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket again, not for the napkin this time, but for something else. His phone. He placed it on the table, the screen lighting up for a brief second before going dark again. Lily caught a glimpse of it, just enough to notice the flood of missed calls and messages stacked one after another, names she did not recognize, but the volume alone told a story. That, he said simply. Lily frowned slightly. Work? She asked. Ethan nodded. Responsibility, he corrected. Expectations. Decisions that affect people I do not even know. His tone was not bitter, not dramatic, just honest in a way that felt heavier than complaint. Lily looked at the phone, then back at him. And you can just ignore all that? She asked. Ethan shook his head slowly. No, he said. I can delay it. That is different. She considered that for a moment, then asked the other half. And what are you waiting for? Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he looked at her, really looked this time, as if measuring something he had not fully understood until now. For something that feels real enough to go back to all of that without losing myself again, he said quietly. The words settled between them, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, like something that had been waiting to be said for a long time. Lily felt it, even if she did not fully understand it. She glanced down briefly, her fingers tracing the edge of the table again, grounding herself in something familiar. And you think you were going to find that here? She asked. Ethan followed her gaze for a second, then looked back up. I already did, he said. Lily's breath caught just slightly, not enough to show, but enough to feel. You barely know me, she said again, softer this time, less defensive, more uncertain. Ethan nodded. That is exactly why it matters, he replied. The simplicity of it left her without an immediate response. Outside, a car passed slowly, its reflection sliding across the glass before fading away. Inside, the diner remained quiet, holding the moment in place just a little longer. And for the first time, Lily did not feel like she needed to push it away. The quiet stretched just a little longer after his words, as if the diner itself had paused to listen, to absorb what had just been said. Lily sat there, her hands still resting on the table, her thoughts moving slower now, more carefully, as if each one needed to be examined before it was allowed to stay. She had heard things before, promises, compliments, words that sounded meaningful in the moment, but faded the second reality pressed back in. But this felt different, not louder, not more dramatic, just steadier, like it did not need to prove itself. You should not say things like that so easily, she said finally, her voice calm but grounded in something protective. Ethan did not look away. I am not saying it easily, he replied. I am saying it because I have spent years around things that feel the opposite. Lily tilted her head slightly, studying him again, not just as a man who had walked into her diner, but as someone carrying a life she could not see yet. Then maybe you are just tired, she said. People see things differently when they are tired. Ethan considered that, then nodded slightly. That is true, he admitted. But I have been tired for a long time, and nothing has felt like this before. That made her pause again, the honesty in it difficult to dismiss. She looked down briefly, then back up, her expression softer but still cautious. You were talking about one moment, she said. One night. One map. Ethan shook his head gently. No, he said. I am talking about what that moment showed me. Lily frowned slightly. Witches? She asked. Ethan leaned forward just enough to close the distance again, his voice quieter now, but more certain. That there are still people who do not calculate everything before they act, he said. People who do not measure worth before offering something. Lily let out a small breath, her fingers pressing lightly against the table as she absorbed that. That is not rare, she said, though her voice lacked the confidence it might have had before. Ethan did not argue. Maybe not where you come from, he replied. But where I come from, it is. That landed differently. Lily looked at him again, this time not just curious, but aware that there was more beneath the surface than he had said. Where do you come from? She asked quietly. Ethan hesitated, just for a second, then reached for his phone again. This time, instead of setting it face down, he turned it slightly toward her, the screen lighting up as a notification appeared. A name. A company logo. Headlines stacked beneath it. Words she could not fully read in the brief second before the screen dimmed again, but enough to catch something that did not belong in her world. Coal Industries. Lily's eyes flickered back up to his face, something shifting quickly behind them now. That is your name, she said slowly. Cole. Ethan nodded once. Yeah. She leaned back slightly, her body reacting before her mind could fully catch up, creating space, distance, something she could control. You are not just someone who works in business, she said, the realization forming fully now. Ethan did not interrupt. You are. She stopped, not because she did not understand, but because saying it out loud made it real in a way she was not ready for. Ethan finished it quietly for her. I run the company, he said. The words were simple, but they changed everything. The room did not shift, the diner did not suddenly become something else, but the space between them did. Lily felt it immediately, the invisible line she had crossed now snapping back into place, stronger than before. You should have said that, she said, her voice lower now, not angry, but guarded in a way that came from experience. Ethan nodded. I know, he said, but then you would have treated me differently. Lily held his gaze, her expression tightening slightly. Maybe. I should have, she replied. Ethan leaned forward again, not to close the distance this time, but to hold on to what was slipping. That is exactly what I did not want, he said. Lily shook her head faintly, her eyes dropping to the table for a second before lifting again, steadier now, more resolved. That does not change who you are, she said. Ethan met her gaze without hesitation. No, he agreed. But it does not change who you are either. The words lingered, but this time, they did not settle as easily. Because now, Lily was no longer just talking to a man who got lost in the rain. She was talking to someone whose world was far bigger, far more complicated than anything she had ever been part of. And suddenly, everything felt different. The space between them did not just grow, it shifted into something sharper, more defined, like an invisible line that neither of them had acknowledged before was suddenly impossible to ignore. Lily sat back in her seat, her shoulders slightly tense now, her hands no longer resting easily on the table, but pulled closer to herself, as if instinctively guarding something she could not quite name. The diner had not changed, the same worn tables, the same quiet hum, the same familiar smell of coffee and grease. But for her, everything felt different. You should not have come back here, she said after a moment, her voice steady but no longer soft. Ethan did not react with surprise, only a quiet understanding, as if he had expected this shift from the moment he revealed the truth. Why? He asked, not challenging, just asking. Lily let out a small breath, her gaze drifting briefly toward the window before returning to him. Because this is not your world, she said, and I am not part of yours. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression calm but firm, not willing to let that statement settle as fact. You do not know my world, he said. Lily shook her head faintly. I know enough, she replied. I saw your phone. I heard what you said. People like you do not just walk into places like this unless there is a reason. Ethan held her gaze, steady, grounded. There is a reason, he said. You. That should have sounded simple, maybe even reassuring, but now it landed differently, heavier, complicated. By everything she had just learned. Lily looked away again, her fingers pressing lightly against the edge of the table, grounding herself in something real, something she understood. That is exactly the problem, she said quietly. Ethan frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in concern. How is that a problem? He asked. Lily looked back at him, her expression clearer now, more resolved. Because people like you do not stay, she said. You visit. You observe. You take something from the experience, and then you go back to your life like nothing happened. The words were not harsh, but they carried weight, built from something deeper than just this moment. Ethan listened without interrupting, his posture still, his attention fully on her. "And people like me?" he asked gently. Lily let out a small, almost humorless breath. "People like me do not get to visit," she said. "We live here. We stay here. And when something different shows up, we do not get to pretend it does not matter." There it was. Not anger, not accusation, just truth, spoken plainly, without decoration. Ethan absorbed it, not pushing back, not dismissing it, just letting it exist between them. "I am not pretending it does not matter," he said quietly. Lily shook her head again, this time more firmly. "You do not have to pretend," she replied. "You can leave whenever you want." The simplicity of that statement cut deeper than anything else she had said, because it was not about him. It was about what she knew to be real. Ethan leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers, his voice calm, but carrying something stronger now. "What if I do not want to leave?" he asked. Lily met his gaze, steady, unwavering. "Then you are lying to yourself," she said. The words hung there, sharp and clean, leaving no room for misunderstanding. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet of the diner settled around them again, but this time, it felt heavier, more charged. Lily stood up slowly, her decision already made before she moved. "I should get back to work," she said, her voice returning to something more neutral, more controlled. Ethan nodded, not stopping her, not reaching out, but not looking away either. As she turned and walked back toward the counter, the distance between them felt larger than the space of the diner itself. And, for the first time since he walked in, Ethan did not feel like he had found something. He felt like he was about to lose it. The rest of the shift moved forward, but not the way it usually did. For Lily, every motion felt slightly disconnected, like her body was following a routine her mind had stepped away from. She refilled coffee, cleared plates, took orders, but her awareness stayed somewhere else, caught between what she had said and what she had felt when she said it. The words had come out firm, certain, but now they echoed differently in her head, not wrong, but incomplete. Across the diner, Ethan remained at the booth, but something about him had changed too. He was no longer watching the room, no longer observing patterns or tracing quiet movements. He sat still, his hands resting near the folded napkin, his gaze lowered, as if he was no longer trying to understand the world around him, but something inside himself instead. The light outside shifted slowly toward evening, the golden tones fading into a cooler gray, and one by one, the remaining customers filtered out until the diner felt almost empty. Mr. Dawson disappeared into the back for inventory, leaving the front in a rare, quiet pause. Lily noticed before she allowed herself to react. She stood at the counter for a moment, her fingers resting against the edge, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Then, without fully deciding to, she moved. Her steps were slower this time, less guarded, not because the distance between them had disappeared, but because she was no longer trying to pretend it had not affected her. When she reached the table, Ethan did not look up immediately. For a second, she simply stood there, taking in the stillness, the weight of everything unsaid. "You are still here," she said quietly, but this time it was not a question, not even an observation. It was something else. Ethan looked up then, his expression calm but more honest than before, like the space between words had been stripped away. "I said I would be," he replied. Lily nodded faintly, her eyes drifting briefly to the napkin before returning to him. "You could have left," she said. Ethan gave a small, almost tired smile. "I could have," he admitted. "But that would have made everything you said true." That made her pause, the meaning settling in more deeply than she expected. She pulled out the seat across from him again, sitting down without asking this time, her posture less defensive, but still careful. "I did not mean it like that," she said after a moment. Ethan shook his head gently. "You meant it exactly the way you said it," he replied. "And you were not wrong." Lily looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing faint lines against her skin, grounding herself in something she could hold on to. "Then why are you still here?" she asked, softer now, not challenging, but trying to understand. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, but stripped of anything unnecessary. "Because leaving would be easier," he said. "And I am tired of choosing what is easy." The simplicity of it cut through everything else, leaving no room for interpretation. Lily felt it, The weight of that choice, the difference between saying something and actually staying when it mattered. She looked up at him again, really looked this time, not at the coat, not at the watch, not at the world he came from, but at the person sitting across from her. "You do not belong here," she said quietly, but there was less certainty in it now. Ethan nodded. "I know," he said, "but maybe that is the point." Lily let out a slow breath, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly, not gone, but no longer holding as tight. "And what happens when you go back?" she asked. Ethan glanced briefly at his phone, still sitting silent on the table, then back at her. "I will still have to deal with everything I left behind," he said, "but I will not go back the same." Lily studied him, the words settling into something real, something that did not feel like a promise, but a decision. "That sounds like something people say when they are about to make a mistake," she said quietly. Ethan smiled faintly, but this time there was something lighter in it, something steadier. "Or when they are finally about to make the right one," he replied. The silence that followed was not heavy anymore. It was something else, something open, like a space that had not fully formed yet, but was no longer breaking apart. And for the first time since everything changed, Lily did not feel like she had to push him away to protect herself, because something in his choice to stay felt more real than anything she had expected. The evening settled in slowly, the last traces of daylight fading beyond the diner windows until the glass reflected more of the inside than the world outside. The quiet had deepened into something steady and calm, the kind that did not feel empty, but full in a way that was hard to explain. Lily remained seated across from Ethan, neither of them rushing to leave, neither of them pretending that the day had not changed something between them. The clock on the wall ticked past 6, then a few minutes more, marking time in a way that suddenly felt less important than the moment itself. "We close soon," Lily said softly, though there was no urgency in her voice. Ethan nodded once, his eyes briefly shifting around the diner, taking in the small details one more time, as if committing them to memory. "I figured," he said. Lily glanced toward the counter, then back at him, her fingers lightly brushing against the surface of the table before she spoke again. "So this is where it ends?" she asked, not as a challenge, not even as a question he had to answer, but as something she needed to say out loud. Ethan met her gaze, steady, certain. "That depends," he said, "on what you think this is." Lily let out a quiet breath, her eyes drifting for a second before returning to him. "It is a moment," she said. "A good one. But moments do not last." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, but carrying a quiet conviction that had been building all day. "Then maybe it is not just a moment," he said. Lily looked at him, searching, weighing, not just his words but the way he had stayed, the way he had listened, the way he had not walked away when it became complicated. "And what would it be instead?" she asked. Ethan reached into his coat once more, pulling out the napkin again, placing it carefully between them like he had done before, but this time, it felt different. Not fragile, not temporary, intentional. "A starting point," he said. Lily stared at it, the familiar lines, the ink slightly blurred but still clear enough to follow, and for the first time, she did not see it as something small. She saw it as something that had connected two completely different lives in a way neither of them had expected. "You are asking me to step into your world," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head immediately. "No," he replied. "I am asking if I can step into yours, without losing what we found in the middle." The words settled differently this time, not heavy, not overwhelming, but honest in a way that did not demand anything from her. Lily felt it, the difference between someone offering something and someone trying to take it. She looked up at him, her expression no longer guarded, no longer distant, but still careful, still real. "You do not even know where that leads," she said. Ethan smiled faintly, but there was no hesitation in it. "Neither did I last night," he said, "and it turned out to be the most important turn I have taken in a long time." Lily let out a small breath, something lighter this time, something closer to acceptance than resistance. She reached forward slowly, her fingers brushing against the edge of the napkin, not taking it, but not pulling away either. "And what if I say no?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his voice steady. "Then I leave," he said. "But I do not forget." The simplicity of it made everything else feel clearer. No pressure, no promises he could not keep, just a choice. Lily looked at the napkin again, then at him, and for a moment, everything else faded. The bills, the routine, the difference between their worlds. All of it stepped back just enough to make room for something new. Then maybe, she started, her voice soft but certain, we do not follow the map this time. Ethan's expression shifted slightly, curiosity replacing expectation. What do we do instead, he asked. Lily met his gaze, a faint, genuine smile forming for the first time that day. We draw a new one, she said. And for the first time since he had walked into the diner, Ethan did not feel like he was trying to find his way back. He felt like he was finally moving forward. A quiet act of kindness in the rain changes everything when a struggling waitress offers directions to a lost stranger, never realizing he is a powerful soul, searching for something he cannot find in his own world. This emotional journey unfolds as one of the most compelling millionaire stories, where a billionaire returns not for business, but for truth, connection, and something real that money could never buy. As the working-class woman navigates her daily survival and the millionaire CEO confronts the emptiness behind success, their worlds collide inside a small diner, creating one of those unforgettable millionaire stories that highlight the contrast between wealth and authenticity. Through subtle conversations, emotional tension, and a powerful reveal, this story explores trust, identity, and the courage to stay when walking away would be easier, making it stand out among modern millionaire stories that focus on real human connection rather than fantasy. As the truth of his identity challenges her beliefs and forces both of them to confront their own realities, the story builds toward a meaningful payoff where choice, not status, defines love, placing it among the most heartfelt millionaire stories ever told. In the end, what begins as a simple map drawn on a napkin becomes a symbol of direction, purpose, and a shared path forward, proving once again through powerful storytelling why millionaire stories continue to resonate with audiences who believe that true value is not measured by wealth, but by the courage to care. Character 1. A white female waitress aged 22, natural makeup, tired but kind eyes, damp hair, wearing simple worn diner uniform and apron, front-facing portrait, realistic lighting, cinematic detail, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon, authentic human texture. Character 2. A white male millionaire age 32, sharp jawline, composed expression, clean hairstyle, wearing tailored dark suit and coat, front-facing portrait, realistic lighting, cinematic detail, natural skin texture, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon, authentic presence.